Welcome to the ATA Podcast, where each month we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association.
Let's get started with a few quick announcements.
The Nordic Division is a home within ATA for translators and interpreters working with the languages of the Nordic region. The division aims to provide a setting where members can network and share information relevant for their work and professional development. Join us by emailing division@atanet.org and become part of a small and friendly division. Are you an SPD member yet? The Spanish Language Division has Intercambios, a quarterly newsletter filled with insightful articles about the Spanish language. And then there's Espalista, our active listserv, and the SPD podcast. Follow us on social media or visit our website at www.ataspd.org and click the Keep Me Updated button to keep up with all that the SPD has to offer.
Welcome to the ATA podcast. My name is Adam Sachs and I am your host, and I am here today with Elias Shakkour. Elias Shakkour, CT, is director of the Translator and Interpreter Corps at DePaul University, where he also teaches translation and interpreting. He has an MA in Conference Interpreting from the Monterey Institute of International Studies, a PhD in Linguistics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and 10 years of experience teaching translation and interpreting at the university level. He has 8 ATA certifications and serves as an ATA certification exam grader for English into Arabic and Arabic into English, the language chair for English into Arabic, and a co-deputy chair of the certification committee. Elias, thank you so much for joining us today. Elias is joining us today to talk about the ATA certification program.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Our pleasure. So for those who are new to ATA or seeking certification from ATA for the first time, what can you tell us about the process of obtaining ATA certification?
So ATA certification is a program that provides a nationally and internationally recognized credential for skilled translators. It's a credential attesting to very high levels of skill and expertise in translation. So this is not something that is to be pursued by somebody who is just beginning or is not sure whether they have the requisite translation skills. It's something for people who already know that they have advanced skills and expertise in translation. That being said, there is not a minimum amount of years of experience that you need to have. You don't need to have a specific degree, but you do need to be qualified as a translator. So to a certain extent, there's some self-assessment that needs to happen. You need to take a look at where your current translation skills are, and that can help you decide if you're ready to take the exam.
Great, thank you. What can you tell listeners about preparing for the exam? Like what resources are available, such as, I'm familiar with some of them, such as practice tests and study groups offered by some ATA divisions, what have you. What can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Before I go into that, you do have to be at least 18 years old. There is a minimum age requirement. You cannot be a minor. There are some people who have just graduated high school and they think maybe they should take the exam because they want to become translators. Number one, they probably at that point still don't have the skills that they need, but even if they did, they would need to wait until they turned 18. But to answer your question about preparation, so I think there's kind of two elements to this. One element would be kind of the big picture. How can you be prepared sort of at a big picture level, not necessarily in a targeted way specifically for the exam? So while there is not a minimum amount of experience that you have to take the exam, no specific degree that you have to have, etc., having some amount of experience and or some amount of training, whether that be a college degree or even standalone courses, can help. And in general, having some grounding in translation theory can also help. Again, none of these are set in stone, but these are definitely things that what can help sort of if somebody's thinking, is this something that I should even be considering right now? I would ask myself, how much experience do I have? Have I received any training? How familiar am I with translation theory? So those are just kind of some big questions, to ask yourself first. But beyond that, let's say you kind of feel generally okay about those things, but you want some targeted help. So as you mentioned, there are multiple things that you can do. There are practice tests. That is something that I recommend to almost anybody that comes to me and asks about certification. I think the practice test is an excellent way to prepare. The way the practice test works is it's basically the same format as the exam. The main difference is a practice test is only one passage that you have to translate, whereas on the exam you have to translate two. But if you really want to simulate the exam experience, you can order two practice tests, and that way you'd have two passages. And it's up to you to replicate the exam experience. In other words, giving yourself only the same amount of time that you would get on the exam, only using the resources that are allowed, etc. But you can do that. It's very easy to do that. And that way, by taking the practice test, you really get the exam experience basically at a much smaller cost. So that's another important thing is the practice test costs less than the exam. So it's a smaller investment. And then you get feedback. You get feedback of the type that you would not get on the exam. Generally, for the exam, you are told whether you passed or failed. And if you failed, you're given the average score because the exam is graded by two people. So you get the average. So you kind of know sort of where you fell and how close you were to passing, but you're not given any information about what errors you made and things like that. But for the practice test, you do. You can see which errors you made, how many points each error was assessed, and you also get some comments from the grader. So you get a lot of rich feedback, and it can really help you sort of gauge, how prepared you are. In addition to the practice test, there are workshops and preparation sessions that are offered by various ATA divisions and ATA chapters. So if somebody's interested in those, they can reach out to the respective division and chapter, see what they're offering. Sometimes ATA divisions or members of ATA divisions can set up their own study groups, and they might be looking for people to study with. And so that's another thing. Also at the conference, often there are sessions that are intended to help people prepare. For example, at the upcoming conference in Boston, there's going to be an advanced skills training session offered by Diego Mancilla, who is also a certified translator, and it's going to be on preparing for ATA's English to Spanish certification exam. There is also free information on the ATA website under certification. It's called How to Prepare, and that's also really important. It's important to go there and basically understand how the exam works and things like that. ATA also has a mentoring program, and if the mentor is certified, they may also be able to provide some guidance. I would just say, regardless of how you prepare, even if you're an experienced translator, it's best to prepare somehow. It's best to take advantage of at least one or two of these things so that you can kind of get a better sense of whether you're ready to take the plunge or whether you still need to work on something, if you need a little bit more practice, etc.
Great, thank you. What is the current pass rate for the exam, or I should say like most recent pass rate for the exam? And does it vary by language? And if you have seen like a variation based on language, why do you think that is?
So the pass rate does vary a little bit from year to year. Generally, it's around 20% across the board if we're just kind of looking at the overall pass rate. It can vary by language, and it also can vary from year to year. And there are a few different factors that influence that. Some of it has to do with the people that decide to take the exam. So in a specific language pair, we might have people that take the exam when they actually are not qualified to. But as I said earlier, we don't really have any strict requirements other than being 18 or above and being an ATA member. Other than that, it's kind of up to each individual to decide if they want to take the exam. And some people, no matter how much we try to educate people about who should be taking the exam and who maybe should wait, there are some people who think that they're ready when they're not. So that's going to drive down the pass rates. On the other hand, sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes there's pent-up demand for a new language pair that has not been offered yet. So there are people that are qualified, but they don't have certification because we haven't offered that language pair yet. So once we do, as soon as it launches, a lot of those people take the exam and pass. So that's going to drive the pass rate up for that specific language pair. Another situation is that some people are a little bit misguided about what direction they should take the exam in. So, for example, English into Arabic versus Arabic into English. So, for ATA, those are two separate exams. So, sometimes I have people come up to me and say, oh, I'm interested in taking the exam for Spanish. There are two exams for Spanish. There's English into
Mhm.
Spanish and Spanish into English, and you may be perfectly qualified for one, but not for the other. So some people are misguided about what direction they should take, or it could not, it could be, it may not necessarily be the case that they're misguided. It could be that we only offer one direction, but it's not the right direction for them, but they take it anyway because they want certification if possible. And generally, they're not going to pass if it's not the right direction for them. And other factors that might influence it is that some of our language pairs are very low demand. So, for example, Croatian into English, we don't get that many people who take that exam. So sometimes the pass rate for that exam may be kind of skewed, right? Because we have a
Mhm.
small sample size, as it were. So it's not really going to be representative either way. But if you're looking at the numbers, you might see, oh, wow, look at Croatian. It could be like 100% one year because only one person took that exam and passed, right? Or conversely, if one person took it and failed, then we have a 0% pass rate for
Mhm.
completion, right? So those are not really very representative. And then just another factor to throw out there, which is similar to what I said earlier about the pent-up demand for a new language pair, is if we have a group or a translation class, people that have been working hard to study and prepare, then maybe they all take the exam at the same time and most of them pass. That might boost the pass rate for that language pair temporarily, for that year.
Sure. You mentioned just now about sometimes there are new language pairs that we add and due to pent up demand or whatever. So that I hadn't thought of that when we were going into this interview, and curious to hear, are there going to be any new language pairs pairs for the exam offered this year that you know of?
So, yes, we actually just got Persian into English approved. So that is in the works. Currently, we are offering practice tests for Persian into English, and soon we will be offering the exam for Persian into English. Yes, so
Persian meaning Farsi?
that's a very good question. So Persian is actually an umbrella term that includes Farsi, which is spoken in Iran, Dari, which is spoken in Afghanistan, and Tajik, which is spoken in Tajikistan. So
Wow.
many people use those terms interchangeably, probably because Iran is the country with the largest number of Persian speakers, but Persian does actually include Dari, the variety spoken in
Mhm.
Afghanistan, and Tajik, the variety spoken in Tajikistan. Those three varieties are mutually intelligible to a great extent, and Persian is the term that is used for all of those. So the exam passages may include, for example, vocabulary that is Dari or Tajik.
Very interesting. How does ATA maintain and update the certification program in terms of ensuring its continued relevance and accessibility?
So there's a lot of things we do. We have a certification committee, which consists of, I think, currently 9 of the graders in the program. And we have a certification committee chair. His name is Larry Boguslaw. We have 2 deputy chairs, myself and Holly Mickelson. And we also have a certification program manager, Karen Bailey, who oversees the program. She's fantastic. So the certification committee and the certification program manager meet regularly 4 times a year. And in addition to that, the certification committee chair, the 2 deputy chairs, and the certification program manager communicate regularly behind the scenes, as it were, mostly via email. And we're constantly discussing topics that are relevant, ways that we can be improving the program, things that need to change, new things to introduce, etc. Also, the ATA board discusses certification matters regularly, and the certification committee submits reports to the board. And also, we submit action requests when there is something that needs to be changed but requires board approval. Some specific things that we work on We are constantly updating our program documents. For example, we have a massive document called Into English Grading Standards, which is intended to guide all graders into English, regardless of the source language, in terms of things like, do you accept the Oxford comma or not, or are both acceptable, things like that.
Hmm.
And it's intended to ensure a certain level of consistency. We also have documents talking about error categories that we use on the exam. So every error that is marked on an exam is assessed a certain number of points, but also an error category. For example, grammar,
Hmm.
terminology, ambiguity. And we're constantly talking about whether we need to update those. Do we need to add new categories? Do we need to omit some of the categories? Do we need to collapse certain categories into one? Things like that. We also offer regular training for graders. So generally between 2 to 4 or 5 trainings a year for graders. This is a way to make sure that our graders are up to date on any changes in the program. It's also meant to make sure that they are sort of keeping up their skills as graders, things like that. We also check the list of allowed resources for the exam regularly. So earlier I mentioned when I was talking about the practice test that one of the ways that you can simulate the exam is to make sure that you're only using what is on the allow list, as we call it. And so we check those regularly to see if we need to add resources to that list, take away resources, etc. So you can go online and you can see the allow list, which consists of dictionaries and other references that are online that are allowed that you can use. So for the exam, it's not the case that you can use whatever you want on the internet. There are restrictions, and that's all explained on the website.
I'm glad you brought that up because I actually did want to ask, see if I could find out a little bit more about that. What goes into determining like what some of the allowed resources are? Because having kind of gone through some of this process of exploring the certification exam, like there are certain resources that I was surprised to not see on the allowed list. So how do you, whether it's like, for one language or another, what determines what makes sense to include on the allowed resources?
Generally, we want to avoid machine translation. We want to make sure that people are actually translating these passages using their own skills and their own abilities. They're not using AI, they're not using things like Google Translate. That's one of the biggest factors that goes into that
Sure.
decision. And we also just want to make sure that the resources that are allowed are kind of authoritative and reliable. And we do allow Google searches, but you can only use what comes up on the main page. In other words, you can't go to the websites that come up. And
Hmm.
again, that's just to kind of limit people's ability to sort of rely on knowledge that is not their own. Because at the end of the day, while in the real world, as a translator, you can use whatever you want, obviously, to produce a translation. For this, we do want to see what you can do with few resources in a way, because if you can do it with few resources, then you can do it with more resources. But the other way around is not necessarily the case. But the biggest thing I would say is machine translation and AI.
Sure, of course. Where do things stand at this point in terms of exams taken online versus in person? I know this is a constantly quickly evolving matter in terms of the taking the exam. And are there some improvements in the works for online exams since this format is relatively new? Um, and yeah, how often are exam sittings offered?
That's a great question. So currently, the vast majority of candidates take the exam online. Very few are taking it in person. Some still prefer to do that or need to because of technical limitations. So ATA still does offer an in-person exam, at least at the annual conference, so at least once a year. Some ATA chapters try to offer an exam sitting throughout the year, but we don't have very many of those anymore. and a few have had to be canceled because there weren't very many people that registered. So at this time, it's almost exclusively online. The online exam can be taken any day of the week or the weekend, so 24/7, even on holidays, as long as our vendor exam room has the space. So it's best to schedule your exam with them right after you register to ensure that you get the date and the time that you want. You do need to schedule your exam within 30 days of registering. So, that being said, we do have an exam season. I know I said 24/7, but our exam season runs from April to September for the online exam. And then for the few in-person exams, it does run into October because we offer the in-person exam at the conference, which is in October. As far as improvements are concerned, the vendor that we work with, Exam Room, does occasionally roll out general updates that will benefit all their clients. And we, on our end, do ask for adjustments if possible when we can, such as, for example, adding passage numbers for clarity, etc. And there are things that we can ask for, things that are not possible. So we try to work within what's possible in order to benefit all of our candidates. And when we do get requests for changes or complaints, we do pass those on to exam room to see what can be done.
I do want to point out, like you said, that we're now at a point where the exam is taken almost exclusively online. That's kind of happened within the last, roughly 5 years, correct? It's been
Yes.
a change largely. I mean, very much facilitated exponentially in the midst of the pandemic, but like, really at this point, here we are, where really that's kind of where how big of a change we've seen toward that online format pretty recently.
Yes. Mhm.
Can you talk about retaking the exam and the stipulations around that?
Yes. So as I said earlier, we consider each language pair and language direction to be its own exam. So English into Spanish is a separate exam from Spanish into English. French into English would also be separate, of course. So currently we have around 33 or 34 different exams. So you can retake the same exam, but you have to wait until the next exam year to retake it.
Yeah.
But within the same year, you could take a different exam. In other words, if you took Spanish into English, you could take English into Spanish that same year or French into English, because again, those are not considered the same exam. But if we're talking the same exam, let's say you take English into Spanish and you don't pass, you can retake that, but you have to wait until the next year. The reason for that, in case anybody's curious, is that we generally tend to use the same passages within one exam year. So if you were to retake it, you would probably have the same passages, whereas the following year, you would probably see new passages.
So it puts you at at an advantage as to in terms of having already worked with the passages, which
Correct.
okay. Um, so you were a grader for Arabic into English and English into Arabic exams. Can you walk us through the process of grading an exam and a practice exam for that matter?
Yes, definitely. So for both exams and practice tests, as I said earlier, we use error categories. We also assign point values to individual errors, and those point values are going to be for each error 1, 2, 4, 8, or 16 points. And we use a system where fewer points is better. So you don't want more points. So basically, we're giving you points for errors, but you don't want to be getting points. And you can get up to 17 points on a passage and still pass. So 18 is failing on an individual passage. And for an exam, there are two passages, and you need to pass both to pass the exam. So if you get a score of 15 on one, but 20 on the other, you don't pass the exam. For a practice test, as I said earlier, it's only one passage. And the same thing would apply. 17 is the cutoff. And for both exams and practice tests, we have documents that we use to ensure consistency and adherence to standards. We have documents about the error categories, the point system. We have a flow chart that guides us in making decisions on errors. We have a framework that we fill out for each practice test passage and each exam passage to mark the errors. And we also have passage-specific guidelines and language-specific guidelines. Passage-specific guidelines are, as the name implies, specific to a passage. The graders go through the passage and discuss what potential errors might be and how many points those errors maybe should be assessed, etc. And then language-specific guidelines are going to be for a specific language pair and direction. So in other words, English into Spanish is going to have different language-specific guidelines from Spanish into English, and those are going to be overarching things similar to the into English grading standards, except more specific to the specific language pair and direction. During the process of grading, we also generally are going to try to measure the accuracy of candidates' renditions against external sources such as style guides and dictionaries, etc. So that's kind of an overarching picture of what we use in grading. Now, there are a few differences in terms of how the exam is graded versus how the practice test is graded. For the exam, each exam is assigned to two graders, and the two graders grade the exam separately. They don't discuss, they don't confer until they've each graded the exam. Then they update each other with the different scores. And our goal with grading the exam is for the two graders to be within 10 points of each other on each passage. If there is a discrepancy of more than 10 points, then the two graders discuss that passage and try to bring that discrepancy down to under 10. In other words, maybe one grader marked something as an error and the other didn't. They can discuss it, and maybe one will convince the other, to either mark it as an error or remove the error marking, or maybe mark it down from 4 points to 2 points, etc. At the end of the day, of course, each grader needs to be truly convinced. It's not a matter of trying to make it work just so we narrow that gap. If they can't reach that level of agreement, then they do call on a third grader from the same work group, if necessary, to kind of try to resolve that. And another factor about the exam is that for each passage, we can stop grading after 40 points. If we've hit 40 points already, we don't need to continue grading because that's so far outside the range of passing. As far as the practice test is concerned, it's only assigned to one grader. That grader grades it independently. For the practice test, we do grade up to 80 points, not 40. So we can stop once we've reached 80 points. And as I said earlier, for the practice test, we do leave feedback, comments on the individual errors and also general comments, which we do not do for the exam. However, we are only expected to leave comments up to 40 points worth of errors. In other words, if I grade a practice test and it's a total of 60 points, I only have to leave comments for 40 points worth of errors. They don't necessarily need to be in order of appearance. They can be a selection of errors. We often try to address, if there are many different types of errors in our feedback and comments, we want to try to address different kinds of errors and not only comment on the terminology errors, for example. And we can comment on more than 40 points, and often we do, it's just not required. And then we also add a section for general comments, just overall on the practice test.
Great, thank you. Since this line of work, our line of work in language and translation is quite global in scope, can you talk a bit about the difference between being about certified translation versus sworn translation, and where ATA certification fits into this context in terms of various forms of certification and documented ability to credentials for translation?
Yeah, in the United States, we only have certified translators. We don't use the term sworn translator. Sworn translator is a term that's used in some other countries, and that credential is not necessarily going to be similar to ATA certification in terms of the qualifications that are needed to earn it, the process of earning it, and the value of the credential. Each country and program is going to have its own process and requirements and procedure. And so if somebody tells you that they are a sworn translator in a certain country, and then somebody else tells you that they are ATA certified in the United States, those are not necessarily going to be comparable credentials. They may or may not be, and it's going to depend on the specific country and the specific program and the specific path that they pursued in order to earn that credential. So there's not really anything I can say that is going to cover all the different possible scenarios. It's going to be on a case by case basis. And I think it's going to fall upon the client or the agency or whoever is thinking about whether they should work with a foreign translator to do that research and do their due diligence to figure out what exactly that credential means.
And what are some examples of how you have used your certification to benefit your career? Are you able to share stories about others who are certified and have used their certification to their advantage?
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. One of the biggest advantages that I noticed immediately after I became certified is that I started receiving a much bigger flow of job offers. So, one of the biggest advantages here is the directory, the ATA directory, where you are listed in the directory and people can search for you and they can search for certified translators in a specific language pair. And so, once you become certified and you are listed in the directory as certified, that's going to make you accessible to so many more people. And so you're going to start getting a lot more job offers without you having to do the legwork and look for work and reach out to people. Another big advantage that I've noticed is less competition because there are certain types of documents where it's required that they be translated by an ATA certified translator. For example, educational documents. That's one that I've personally experienced a lot. For example, if somebody did their undergraduate degree in Mexico and now they want to do a master's degree in the United States, they need their diploma and transcripts translated from Spanish into English. And often universities in the United States will require that those documents be translated by an ATA certified translator, which means that your only competition is going to be other certified translators in that specific language pair and direction. Other ways that it can benefit you is more successful marketing because this is a recognized credential. So when you're trying to market yourself, the credential speaks for itself. And often, as soon as you say, I'm an ATA certified translator, no more questions need to be asked because a lot of agencies and clients recognize the value of the credential. You can also set higher rates. You can charge more, as can be expected, because you can give people a measure of confidence in your skills and your abilities. I've also heard from certified translators that sometimes they are able to make certain requests of agencies and get what they're looking for. For example, more generous turnaround times. In other words, more time to work on a project because they are ATA certified. I actually recently wrote an article for the ATA Chronicle on the benefits of certification. It's called Why ATA Certification Benefits of the Credential. And that article actually does feature the voices of a selection of certified translators. So anybody who's interested can go find that article and read those testimonials from certified translators.
So as we wrap up here, I'd love to hear a little bit more about as someone who holds 8 ATA certifications, if you can tell us a little bit more about your journey, how you got to this point, and any parting thoughts that you have for people who are listening to this recording and who are considering the ATA certification program.
Yeah, so I've always been very passionate about languages. I grew up bilingually with Arabic and English, and I started learning other languages at a very young age. I started with French and then Spanish and then German, and those five languages would be the languages that I would consider myself highly proficient in. Other than those languages, I do have varying degrees of proficiency in other languages, such as Italian, Hebrew, and Dutch. I didn't pursue ATA certification until after I had earned my master's in translation and interpreting at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. At the Monterey Institute, they made it very clear to us that the ATA exam is a very rigorous exam and that it wasn't for people who were just starting out as translators necessarily. So I took it very seriously. I waited until I felt fairly confident, although I still wasn't 100% sure that I was going to pass, but I went for it and I did pass. And from there, I decided to pursue as many other certifications as I thought I might get. And so I have 7 certifications into English. Those are Arabic, German, Spanish, French, Italian, Dutch, and Portuguese, and then 1 into Arabic, 1 out of English, English into Arabic. I wasn't able to pursue that one until later because that was not originally offered. But once it became offered, I did pursue it. And one comment here for people to be aware of is that for the source language, the language you're translating out of, you need passive proficiency, but you don't need active proficiency. In other words, you need to be able to understand it in writing, you need to be able to read it and have advanced reading comprehension in that language, but you do not need to have active abilities in that language. You don't need to be able to write in that language or speak in that language for that matter. So, as I said earlier, my skills in Portuguese, Dutch, and Italian, my active skills in those languages are lower than they are in the other languages, but my passive skills are strong enough to have enabled me to pass the exam. As a last message to people, I would say that ATA certification is still relevant. There are still benefits. Many people have understandable concerns about the value of ATA certification or even the viability of a translation career given the rise of machine translation and artificial intelligence. While those have driven the demand down to some extent, the demand for human translators, there is still demand for human translators. And I cover that in my article on the benefits of certification. So for anybody who's wondering whether it's worth pursuing, whether ATA certification is worth pursuing, or whether the translation field in general is worth pursuing, I would say yes, and you should be aware of the market. You should be aware of the factors that are going to increase demand, decrease demand, but it's definitely not something that you should just completely rule out.
Thank you so much, Elias. To everyone listening, please check out the show notes as well, where we'll have a link to Elias's article and other resources and information about the ATA certification exam. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that this is beneficial to listeners.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's a wrap. To learn more about the American Translators Association, including how to join, visit atanet.org. Until next time.